And it's always great to come back, so thanks for inviting me. Today I'm going to tell you something about where I think we are in the longevity quest, and I'll give you a little bit of introduction to lead into that. And actually, I'm going to focus largely today on biologic aging clocks. So how do we measure aging? What does that mean? First of all, just a little bit of data, and I apologize to people who have shown this data before I discuss the meeting. But I think it really illustrates the challenge that we face globally and specifically in China. This is global data looking at life expectancy, WHO region in 2019 for both sexes and healthy life expectancy for both sexes. So this is globally. And you can see there's about a 10-year gap between health span and lifespan. So what that means is we're living longer and continue to live longer as we go forward, but we're not going up as much in health span as we are in lifespan. So there's a period of morbidity or sickness that is growing, and our healthcare costs are accelerating through the roof because of this. And one of the challenges is that if we don't find a way to reduce this health span gap, we're going to be economically challenged in how to go forward. I'd also point out that, as you probably know, women live longer than men, but the health span is much closer between women and men than lifespan. So men die sooner, but they're relatively healthy longer. So I just put this as old data, but I think it illustrates the point even better. This is the change in life expectancy in Singapore, where my lab is, between 1990 and 2010. And you can see that life expectancy went up quite a lot during that period. If you were a male, you got a 30% return on investment. For every 10 years you live, you can expect to live 3 years longer. But the healthy life expectancy change was much smaller than that of life expectancy. And so we're basically keeping people alive longer, but we're keeping them sick longer. And this data is true in China or anywhere else in the world or not. And I think that the problem is that we focus too much of our medicine on sick care. We're treating people after they get sick and trying to treat their specific illnesses rather than taking a life course approach to health and doing what I call a holistic healthcare approach. And you can see that both in medical practice, where you have specialists in certain areas, heart disease, neurodegeneration, you have specialists in endocrinology or eye diseases, and there's not enough communication between them. And so you end up with geriatric patients that are taking 10 different medicines prescribed by different doctors, and actually the multiple different medicines are doing more harm than they are good in many cases. You also see this in research, where if you look at the National Institute of Health in the United States, you have institutes specializing in almost each of these areas, and not enough holistic thought on what's going on in the body. And so I've been using this slide on the right for 20 years now, depressed to say. And I think that what it's trying to illustrate is that there are things that in common with all these diseases. And in fact, the biggest thing is aging. Aging is the biggest risk factor for each of these conditions, and many others that I didn't put on this slide. And so that leaves us with a very simple concept. If we can slow aging, we can delay the onset of probably all of these conditions and many others. And we can extend health span. And so I think what we need to do is put the healthcare back into medicine. And this is an underestimate of what's really happening, because I was going around saying that the challenge of the aging population is in fact the biggest medical challenge of the 21st century, and then this thing called COVID happened. I'm very familiar with COVID right now because I got it 6 days ago. Don't worry, I'm negative. Okay. But I'm still goopy. But in reality, COVID is just another lens to look at aging. Because by far, the biggest risk factor for mortality with COVID-19 was being over the age of 70. And that's independent of specific age-related diseases. In essence, aging is reducing your resilience, your ability to adapt and recover to things like viral infections. And so aging is affecting acute diseases because you don't respond to them particularly well. And aging is also causing functional decline. Anybody my age in their 50s already knows that. You're not running as fast, you're not as energetic. If you're honest with yourself, you might not be thinking as quickly. And I think that what this means is that we can really slow down this aging process. There's many, many benefits. So enough about that. I won't go into too much introduction. Our lab has been really focused on interventions and biomarkers. So how do we slow aging and how do we measure that we're slowing aging? And interventions can be many, many different things. Interventions can be environmental. We're recently working with a city in Southeast Asia to help design a new city that's healthy longevity friendly. So what does that mean? Well, for instance, living near green spaces and parks keeps you biologically younger. Having architecture that's designed to make you walk and move rather than ride elevators is beneficial. Trying to have restaurants that offer healthy diets distributed to the city, etc. So you get the idea. Healthy longevity interventions can be very broad, and aging can be really anything if you think about it. Lifestyle interventions are a major component of aging. I think it's safe to say that we know that if you exercise regularly, eat a healthy diet, get plenty of sleep, and manage your stress levels, you're much more likely to be healthy longer and probably to live longer as well. Much of our work has been on supplements, natural products, and also drugs that may impact the aging process. And I'll just touch on those today. But I think another revolution that's happened in the last 15 years in the aging world is the ability to measure aging using aging biomarkers and clocks. And those have generally been using omics-based data sets in large populations and using artificial intelligence-based strategies to try to measure aging. Now, the first clocks were designed to predict the chronological age of the individual, and then the second generation clocks have been designed to predict some outcome, like mortality. And I'll show you a new clock that we published recently looking at mortality. These are just small molecule interventions that have been reported or suggested to extend lifespan. So if you go to the drug age database, this is almost 3 years ago now, so it's not much larger. There were already 1,000 distinct drugs that were suggested that might slow aging. All of these things on the right we test in animal models, and in Singapore we have everything from yeast, worms, flies, killifish, mice, and we do human clinical studies. And I think the idea is to create a pipeline of interventions, validate them across evolutionarily divergent species, and then test them in well-designed clinical studies in humans. Everything in green that you see, we see some benefit to in terms of extending health span and lifespan, at least in preclinical models, and in some cases there's human data. The things in yellow we've tested, we don't see a lot of benefits in the preclinical models, but I have to say that because we don't see a positive effect doesn't mean it doesn't work. The conditions are very important in animal models, and different labs don't always get the same results. Having said that, if we can validate findings from other labs, we feel much more confident going into human studies. And so we have clinical studies designed on many of those compounds in green. We're completing one on alpha-ketoglutarate right now, and there's one on rapamycin studying shortly. I think we have a challenge in the aging field, though. For instance, we have 4 major verticals that we've made a lot of progress on in research over the last few decades. Defining interventions, I already mentioned that. Diagnostics or aging clocks, or biomarkers of aging, physiologic markers, we have a lot of those now. Aging pathways, you can think of those as hallmarks of aging or pillars of aging. And we have a lot of outcomes that we know aging drives, diseases, functional decline. But what we don't know yet is how to connect these verticals. And so if you start with a particular intervention, I just took alpha-ketoglutarate for the sake of argument here. What we'd really like to know is which clocks that AKG is most impacting, which diagnostics, which are the aging pathways that are most effective, and what outcomes are driven by AKG. And I think this is important as we go to humans, because what we would really like to do is to combine different interventions together to get larger outcomes. And we'd like to know, to be able to personalize, we'd like to know which individuals are going to respond to which interventions. And right now, I would say we really don't know those things. I would also just caution you that a lot of people are out there saying that if there's 10 different individual interventions that might be good, if you combine all 10 of them together, it's going to be great, that they will act synergistically. There's absolutely no evidence of that in the aging field. I can't predict 2 or 3 molecules together that have additive or synergistic effects. Occasionally they do when we test them, but often they cancel each other out. So be careful when you hear somebody taking 200 pills a day, because I have no idea what they're doing. Okay. And we've gone way beyond small molecules now. We have stem cell clinics all over the world. We have people getting exosomes. I go to some of these clinics and everybody judges me, so I have a whole refrigerator full of peptides and needles to inject it in me. I haven't done that yet. You can go offshore and get gene therapy as a healthy person to live longer. There are many different devices, hyperbaric chambers, cryotherapy. I saw a liquid nitrogen shower yesterday. I haven't probably done that either. And I think that you can make plausible arguments that any of these things might affect aging. The challenge is we don't have well-validated data for what's going to work and what's not going to work. But it really is becoming the Wild West. Okay, so let me dig into some data. So these are biologic aging clocks. I'm hoping you've already heard a little bit about them because I'm going to go a little bit fast through this slide. The original clocks were made largely from DNA methylation data, and those are still the predominant clocks that you see. There are over 100 different biologic aging clocks now that are out there, and many of them are available commercially. This, again, is largely taking large data sets and using a black box approach to try to weight different sites to predict age or to predict outcomes. But you can also make clocks from transcriptomics or really any other omics. And you can make clocks from blood chemistry. And what it basically shows is what you see on the right, which is that you have on the x-axis a chronologic age and on the y-axis a biologic age. And so an individual might be identical between those two, or they might be aging well, and so their biologic age is under their chronologic age. They may be aging poorly, and so their biologic age is over. None of these clocks are fully validated, and there's still a lot of debate in the field as to which ones to use and what they're telling you. I want to take you through a different clock, though, because we wanted to use clocks for some different purposes. Let me just quickly do this one more slide. We know they're working to some extent because the things we know affect aging tend to affect the clock. So being physically active makes you biologically younger. Having a healthy diet makes you biologically younger. I strongly recommend you don't be male. If you're male, that makes you biologically older. Menopause accelerates biologic aging. Infection, smoking, the things we know that can accelerate aging accelerate the clocks, generally speaking. So I think they're onto something, but which ones are best and what they're really telling us is still an open question. And we've been trying to use biologic aging clocks for different purposes. Commonly, they're used to assess age in populations, and they work fairly well for that. We just finished a study of 10,000 Singaporeans, for instance. They can be used also as endpoints for longevity intervention studies, which we and others are trying to use. But we wanted to see if we can make a clock that's actionable in clinical practice. Something we could use right now. How do we inject longevity into the clinic and get the concepts behind aging and longevity used widely? And I'll tell you about that one. We'd also like to predict disease progression. We would like to be able to uncover mechanistic insight about the pathways that drive aging by working backwards from the clocks. And so the last part of my talk, I'm going to give you examples of these things. And so, as I said, you can use DNA methylation or omics, but I'm going to show you some lipid clocks today. And before I do that, I'm going to show you a clock that we built based on clinical parameters. And the reason we chose to use clinical parameters is that these are actionable parameters in the clinic. If you go to the doctor's office and say, I have 13 methylation sites that tell me that I'm 10 years too old, the doctor is going to look at you like you're from Mars, because they may not know much about DNA methylation. And even if they do, there's no actionable thing they can do to fix those methylation sites or to know what that means. But if you go and say, these clinical parameters are telling me my mortality risk is higher, that's an actionable statement. And so we use the NHANES data set. This is a longitudinal data set from the US. And it has about 20 years of follow-up data because we wanted to predict mortality. And this is a project, it's a collaboration with another faculty member, Jan Gruber in the US, and Paul Schwing, who's a wonderful young geriatrician. And so that data is demographic data, questionnaires, medical examination, clinical laboratories. It's all the kinds of things you know about already: LDL, glucose, inflammatory factors, pulse, BMI, etc. And so the question was, could we take the input for 1 year, which is across a wide age range, use that to build a clock to predict mortality, and then test it in the next year of the population? And so this is what the clock looks like. It's like a lot of these clocks. You have a chronologic age, and most people cluster within 5 years or so of their chronologic age. But you have some people that are aging really well by this clock, and other people that are aging poorly. So if we test it on the next year, what does it look like? Well, we took people 65 to 75 and said, how well does this predict mortality in 200 months? And this is the whole population here. It's declining. About half of the population is still alive in 200 months. The ASCVD scores, the cardiovascular disease score parameter, that predict mortality fairly well. These are the lowest quartile for ASCVD, and they have higher mortality. And the best heart function or cardiovascular function is associated with lower mortality. That's expected. But our clock does way better than that. We're better at predicting early mortality, but I think more importantly, we're way better at predicting who's going to be alive in 200 months. And so this clock seems to work well at predicting mortality. And we did a principal component strategy here, and the reason is that you can go back and look at what each of the different principal components mean. And so we plotted these all kind of together here just for the sake of illustration. So all of these green blocks are groups of healthy people. Those are those people that are going to be alive in 200 months. And then you find people heading down different trajectories. And we know what's going on in these trajectories because we have the clinical components that define them. So you have people heading down the cardiometabolic disease axis. This is the US, so there's a lot of people heading down this axis. You have a lot of people getting frail and multimorbid, but without cardiovascular metabolic disease. And then specific disease axis, which is cancers and a few other things. But the interesting thing is we found one principal component that only tracks distance from the green zone, not direction. So it's not telling you what you're going to get. It's telling you how far you are from health. And our thought on this is that this is actually the measure of aging. It's the departure from health, and then depending on your individual parameters, you head down one of these paths. And that axis is basically all inflammation. Immune system, red cell function, this is chronic inflammation, iron storage, all of these things are immune system, and it's highly related to kidney function. So if you look specifically at this component, it's really giving you a very good measure of age, I think. And it works across different cohorts. So this is the calorie restriction study in the US, which many of the methylation clocks don't work well for. And what you see here is that the control population is getting 2 years older after 2 years of normal diet, whereas the calorie restricted group is retarded aging biologically by this clock quite dramatically in that 2-year window. We do know that we're going to have to treat this for Asian populations, and we're already doing that, working with different cohorts. But we think that it's going to work across different ethnicities as well. And I just want to close with comments on this part, and then I'm going to show you just a little bit of data on a couple of this one. So you can look at individual groups of people, and we know what diseases they had, or at least what clinical parameters were outside of the reference range. And we also know what medicines they were taking. So you can ask the question, for instance, how many people have some disease indication, but they're not taking the appropriate medicine for that? And that goes up with it. You can also ask how many people have all of their clinical parameters in a reference range so that they are considered healthy, and that's going down with age. And you can ask what happens to these people. And as you might expect, you find the optimal group have a lower mortality, and then the people that require treatment that are not getting treatment. Again, this is just a snapshot in time when they did the study. Those people have accelerated mortality. But it is interesting if you dig into this optimal group, because you can say, let's look at the optimal people that are taking no drugs. So basically, everything is in the reference range without having to take any medications. And they're doing well, and they have a lower biologic age by a point. But the interesting thing is, you can ask, let's look at people that have optimal clinical chemistry, but they're taking medications. In other words, they had some indication, and they got adequately medicated early, and they have good clinical chemistries. And they actually have a lower biologic age than the people we're calling healthy. And that's true in the survival too. The no-drug group versus what we call a polypill group, where people are getting the statins or the beta blockers or whatever the drug is that they need, metformin. And so it's interesting. I think there's two things this is suggesting. One is that we need to be more aggressive medicating people. We need to stop telling people when they're 60 that, oh, your markers are more or less okay. Just go back, and keep doing what you're doing. We need to be active about getting as early as possible in life, getting people and keeping their clinical parameters optimal. And if we do that, we're going to have higher life expectancy and higher health span. I think the other thing it's suggesting is that what's happening is that these markers are not just disease markers, they're aging markers. And what they're telling us when these, like glucose goes off or blood pressure goes off, these are the first signals that this network in your body that's designed to keep you healthy, this systemic network, is starting to fall apart. And if you catch it early and fix those parameters, you don't just stop that disease trajectory, you keep the network functioning a little bit better, and you protect against other diseases as well. So we think a lot of these drugs we've been using for years are actually longevity drugs if they're used appropriately in people at the right time. And so I think that we need to think about this in terms of medication. We're using this actively in the clinic in Singapore now. In many cases, we can find new conditions or new reasons to be more active with people earlier in life. Just quickly, I don't have much time. We also have been building lipid clocks. And the reason we like lipids or protein proteomic clocks or metabolomic clocks is that these are actual molecules in the cell. The problem with methylation is it's really hard to go from methylation to function. And I don't think there's anything specific about methylation as a marker for aging. You can build just as good clocks from all these other molecules in the body. This is just proof of principle. We can take worm lipidomic data and build a lipid clock that predicts worm aging very well. It's not that exciting, but at least show that lipids are okay for this strategy. And so what we did is we were trying to find a good lipidomic sample in the literature, and so we took one of pancreatic cancer. And so there are 500 pancreatic cancer patients in this cohort and only 200 healthy. And so 200 is not enough to build a clock. So we decided, can we build a clock from the serum of pancreatic cancer patients for lipids that predicts age? Even though these people are sick, can we dissociate the age from the disease? And we were able to do that quite well, actually. And then when we went back and looked at the healthy individuals, they're about 7 to 8 years younger than the pancreatic cancer patients. Perhaps not that surprising. But I think the interesting observation from this is that the biologic age of the individual at the diagnosis of pancreatic cancer predicts survival from the cancer treatment as well as the best pancreatic cancer marker. And so what this suggests is that you know biologic age when someone gets cancer, and we're testing this in other cancers now, we only know in this context, that you have a very good marker of the response they're going to have to the cancer treatment. And maybe combining that with specific cancer markers might do even better. So we're very interested in looking at large cancer data sets now and seeing what biologic age tells us. You can also pick the top lipids that give you the predicted capacity, and they're all lipids that are already known to be linked to aging. And similarly to that, we built a clock from postmortem brain samples just to see if we could do it. And in the same case, we were able to use lipids to predict biologic age very well there. And we noticed that people with neurologic conditions, specifically Down syndrome, have accelerated biologic age. And again, we were able to find just 5 molecules that accurately predict biologic age. And in this case, they're all dolichols, which are in-link glycosylation components. And again, these dolichols have been linked to aging before in the brain, like 25 years ago, and then largely forgotten. So I think it's telling us that these black box approaches to use AI to measure aging are meaningful because we're identifying the molecules that we know from other molecular studies are linked to the aging process. So we can work backwards and clock the mechanism. I'm out of time, I think we'll look at something. I just have 2 more slides quickly. I think that a lot of the clinical data is accumulating is going to allow us to increase health span and lifespan. I think it's going to be a modest increase, that's my guess, 5 or 10 years. That's still a revolutionary change if we can keep people alive and healthy 5 or 10 years longer. But there's something, the big questions in this field are still not answered. Can we dramatically slow aging? Can we extend maximum lifespan? Can we stop aging? Can we reverse aging? I'm skeptical about that, on both of those last two. But we don't know. These are some of the most important questions in biology. And what we've seen is a massive amount of funding going to translational medicine for longevity, which is great, mostly from the private sector, that's great. But we're not seeing a commensurate increase in funding for basic science from government and foundations that can allow us to ask those basic questions that are so essential to answer these issues, that I think are the most important ones in aging. So we need to keep up that funding for basic science as well. I have a lot of collaborators, I won't go through that, but thanks a lot for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Now we have 2 minutes for questions.
Hi, Brian. Very interesting talk. So I have a question. How can individuals, for example, from China, be able to use the data that we gather to see if it's possible to measure my biological is there such an app? For that,
we don't have an app for that first generation clinical